Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. In this video, I'll be reviewing the Image Blu-ray release of the 1973 film My Name is Nobody, an Italian Western that is often miscategorized as a Sergio Leone directed film. Leone produced this film and did apparently participate in doing some second unit shots and a couple of little pieces here and there when the production ran into various troubles, but it was actually directed by his former assistant director, Tonino Valerii, on the first two of the Dollars trilogy of films, who also went on to a pretty sizable career as a director in Italian films. My Name is Nobody is an attempt to ultimately fuse together the serious, almost operatic style of Leone's westerns with the emerging comedy Italian western found in the Trinity films. And that's why the film, of course, stars Terence Hill and Henry Fonda, a direct attempt to link together They Call Me Trinity and Once Upon a Time in the West. Unfortunately for me, and I think a lot of Leone fans, the attempt to combine different tonalities and styles in this film doesn't quite work. And it always feels like a film that's fighting itself. And depending on your level of interest in Italian westerns, and if you enjoy the slapstick humor found in the Trinity films, your mileage is certainly going to vary with My Name is Nobody. The general idea of the plot is that this is late in the days of the Old West, and Henry Fonda plays Jack Beauregard, a notorious legendary gunslinger who's essentially looking for a way out. He's wanting to retire, but he's still seen as the fastest gun in the West, because nobody is faster than Jack Beauregard. And then we're introduced to the Terence Hill character, literally called Nobody, who may just very well be faster than Jack Beauregard, and holds him in a status of hero worship. For the rest of the film, the Beauregard character will go from town to town and place to place, trying to amass enough money or find a way out to quietly retire without being killed off. He is followed around by the Nobody character, who is constantly trying to build him up and goad him into having one last final stand and go out in a blaze of glory, ostensibly against the legendary Wild Bunch, a big group that just rides around the desert and countryside, rampaging, doing whatever they want to do, and of course is one of the film's number of direct nods to Sam Peckinpah's films. Probably the most famous joke or bit from the entire film is that there's a graveyard at one point and they walk past and there's literally a tombstone for Sam Peckinpah. That's probably the best thing in this film for me, that you have something connected to Leone tipping his hat at Sam Peckinpah, even if it's trying to be a humorous satire that doesn't really quite work. Another reason why this film is often mislabeled as a Leone film is that you have many of the key collaborators. This does have an Ennio Morricone score. It was edited by Nino Baragli. So you've got a whole bunch of people on one side of the camera who are part of the usual Leone crew, but even in the cast, you've got a whole bunch of the Leone regulars and favorites outside of just Henry Fonda. Even Mario Brega is in this film. You've also got a little bit of Leone's style in how he loved to pull from the great roster of character actors famous for appearing in Hollywood westerns. And again, another Peckinpah connection, this film has the great character actor R.G. Armstrong in a rather silly role. So you've even got that little flash of it having that direct connection to a Hollywood western. But also there's another interesting Hollywood connection, because a good portion, if not most, of My Name is Nobody was actually shot in the United States, on the actual locations it's set in. That was not very common for Italian westerns. Leone himself sort of pioneered the concept of shooting in Italy, but mostly in Spain and Almeria, to substitute for the American locations. So this film has a slightly different visual look to it in terms of the actual location, because it's mostly being shot in the US. There's even scenes and sequences that were shot in New Orleans for some of the bigger city material. I think the big issue with My Name is Nobody is not the whole, was it actually directed by Leone? What parts did he direct? How much of his signature style is in here? Because frankly, there's only little tiny bits that he did, mostly as second unit. And you've also got some elements being drawn from his films so they can be satirized and made fun of. And you've got some of the key collaborators on both sides of the camera with a Morricone score. So, it's got Leone elements. It's playing around with those, but it's also playing around with what was done in the Trinity films. And while Leone is given the credit for having the story idea, it's not a Leone film, and it's not a successful melding of the Leone style of story with a slapstick comedy. It's also 115 minutes long. It's really far too long and drawn out for what it is. Had this film been closer to, say, maybe 90 or 100 minutes, I think it would at least be significantly tighter and better paced, because as it is, it's a film that plays very slowly, and when it's not doing moments of seriousness or moments of extreme humor, it's this sort of strange in-between land where the film meanders so much that it almost feels like the actors are sort of wandering around, and it doesn't feel like it's a particularly very high budgeted film. It is a drag for me every time I see it. It's a film that feels significantly longer than its actual runtime because it drags so terribly. I do enjoy the Trinity films for what they are, and I'm, of course, a giant Leone fan, but trying to put those two things together and not meshing them, it means they're always fighting each other. And so it's only specific moments where I think the film actually works, despite the presence of having the legendary Henry Fonda. In fact, it feels like he's wasted in the film, as is Terence Hill, outside of the moments that are closest to the Trinity films. I think the film has a couple interesting nuggets of ideas that could have been developed into a more consistent storyline, and there are certain scenes and moments that work or have enough charm to them. Some of them are apparently the bits that Leone worked on or shot or added bits of business to. I think that's the key, that you needed to develop certain ideas and concepts, and most of the film, unfortunately, feels rather flat and dull because it doesn't have that. You also get the sense that, this being 1973, that this was when the Italian Western had already started to decline in popularity, especially since the Trinity films were directly making fun of them lock, stock, and barrel, and made a fortune in doing so. Whenever you have a genre or a run of films that gets to the point where you have successful films made expressly to tear them down and make fun of them, that will always sort of signal the end point of the popularity of this genre. And this film was very successful in Europe, not really in the United States. So ironically, even though this film was shot mostly in the United States, it doesn't have the grandeur or attention to detail that we love and expect from Sergio Leone's films, nor was it very successful in the United States. So I think that was also due to the European humor not really always translating. And of course, the film had to be dubbed into English as it was an Italian film, and all of the films were post-synchronized. Ultimately, I don't think the film has enough of a plot, nor does it have enough comedy actually in it to sustain a 115-minute runtime. It is, of course, being made a year before Blazing Saddles, which is pretty much start to finish chock full of gag after gag after gag, and whether you like Mel Brooks' style or not, you can't deny that that film does have consistent energy. And it is playing around with Western cliches, and it is trying to give a Western experience. It's also photographed in scope, and it's also got a storyline that runs through it. It's not always consistent, but it does run through the whole film. My Name is Nobody doesn't have all of that, and I think it's a perfect film to compare to Blazing Saddles. It's trying to do some of the same basic concepts and ideas. It's just not as consistently tied together, and it doesn't have that spark of energy running through the whole film like Blazing Saddles does. It never gets quite as ridiculously silly as Blazing Saddles, but it's cut from the same cloth. It's trying to do the same thing of having love and adoration for a genre and playing around with the serious concepts, but also satirizing the heck out of them. That's why My Name is Nobody ultimately is a film known only for its lead stars, but most of all for the Sergio Leone connection. That's why it's always discussed in terms of how Leone was involved. The discussions are always, how much did Leone actually direct of the film? Was it just second unit? Did he actually ghost direct most of the film? Should it be labeled a Sergio Leone film? Was he merely the producer? All this stuff. It's always focused around his involvement, because the film itself doesn't generate much discussion at all outside of its actual production era and some of the notable figures. Leone has always cast a shadow over all other Italian westerns. You can't help but compare any Italian western to the Leone films, because you basically jump-started the whole genre with The Fistful of Dollars being such an incredible success. But his shadow completely engulfs My Name is Nobody. You can't look at this film or talk about this film without talking about Leone's influence, because this film is directly trying to play around with that, and it's his former assistant director directing it from a Leone idea, and Leone himself produced it and also helped out some in the second unit in certain pieces. So that's why I think it's such a patchwork affair and such a compromised film. It's really a shame, because it has such promise, it has such great names involved, and I think had it been more consistently plotted and frankly had a properly developed script, I think they could have really had something. As it is, it's a film that has particular moments that stick in the mind, particular moments where a joke lands or a comedic bit works, or there's a serious element that works, but it's a film that's always fighting itself, and it does have moments that simply don't work, some moments that might make you cringe. For me personally, I don't even think Morricone's score is as effective as it could be. It suits the film, and he comes up with a main theme for the characters, but it does seem kind of derivative of some of his other scores for the Leone films and other westerns, and it's trying to suit a film that itself doesn't really quite know what it wants to do. It also contains direct cues from Once Upon a Time in the West whenever Henry Fonda appears at certain intervals. So that's really striking. I suppose it was a meta idea before that was a known concept, but it really doesn't work. And it feels really jarring when Henry Fonda appears as a totally different character in this film, but it starts playing Frank's theme on the soundtrack being redone. So Morricone is quoting himself, but that's really where the film breaks the fourth wall for me and doesn't work at all. Of course, like all Sergio Leone films and Italian westerns, figuring out which version of the film to watch and sifting through all the presentations and video masters over the years and having to look also at import versions, it's not an easy thing to do. Ultimately, you are lucky if you get the complete film in the original aspect ratio with good color and the original mono audio. So on this image Blu-ray, which was done for the film's 40th anniversary back in 2013, what you essentially get is a solid HD presentation that seems to have been taken directly from a scan of a print, or perhaps a variety of prints. This is in the original scope ratio, it's the full 115-minute length, and it only has the English dub. But to talk about the picture quality, this is full of wear, this is full of consistent marks and damage, and even color fluctuations. So you definitely get the feeling that you're actually watching a direct scan of a print that's just been given light cleanup. It's amazing that it looks as good as it does, and the disc is well encoded enough, so it's basically like you're getting to run a solid video transfer of a print source. So you have to expect plenty of wear and movement and damage and marks and maybe some missing frames here and there causing tiny jumps, but also the color fluctuates in areas and can be sort of wild, and sometimes how it varies from shot to shot. So this has not been restored or really worked on much at all outside of making sure the overall presentation is solid enough. Most of the damage in the transfer isn't anything super notable, and after the opening, you're very clearly aware of what sort of transfer you're looking at. However, there are some moments where there are some pretty significant and big marks of damage that even have big scratches and tears that go entirely across the frame. So those will definitely jump out at you more. And ultimately, it's as if you're seeing a print in an art house or at a repertory screening. That's the sort of experience you get here. And considering the varied presentations the film has had in the past, and it took a while to even get a decent DVD presentation, this is at least superior to past releases and is a solid way to watch the film, and even upscales to 4K resolution quite decently. So even watching on an OLED television, it's surprisingly enjoyable enough for what it is in terms of the transfer. Now, the audio is the original English mono dub in lossless DTS HDMA. It is in solid enough quality. It does have some wear and seemingly has probably had some noise reduction applied to it, as there's not a whole lot of hiss and the track does seem quite thin, but it's also a 1973 English dub of an Italian Western, so the quality is always going to be limited to a certain degree because of those constraints. Now, in terms of the packaging and artwork, we have a decent enough cover that's similar to the Image DVD cover from a number of years ago. It's got the 40th anniversary edition banner and a nice image from the original poster of Terence Hill and an image of Henry Fonda from some of the stills. We get a matching spine, and the rear cover carries the same aesthetic. Of course, all the information does play up the Leone connections, mentioning the Leone titles, also giving Morricone a bigger credit, but it at least does put Tonino Valerii's name in bigger font, so it is at least stressing to some degree that this film was not actually directed by Leone. And then we have the same art on the disc label. In terms of supplemental features, this is a bare bones disc. There are 0 extras, not even a trailer. We get a basic menu, and we get the film transfer with the English audio. That's it. There are no additional foreign language dubs, and so this is basically an HD as-is presentation that is still the best version of the film you can get here in the US. Now, there are a variety of Blu-ray releases available in Europe from different labels. There are releases found in Italy, Germany, and France, and for the most part, these seem to all be using or reusing the master made in Italy for their Blu-ray release. This is a superior scan of the film in terms of the overall quality and it coming from a better element, but it does have transfer issues. In particular, it's apparently the bottom of the image to a significant portion does have some significant wobble, so it does have a great deal of movement, and this is apparently a transfer defect that gets carried over to the other releases using this master. So if you were to import a release of the film, you would have another Italian Western that has a technically superior source, but has some sort of transfer defect or problem. For example, the same thing plagues the Italian master and scan of Leone's Duck-You-Sucker, which had a superior image overall compared to the MGM master, but it had transfer issues of its own that made it, frankly, not worth it. So it was just as compromised as the MGM master, just in different ways. So that's the trade-off with the HD masters of this film. You can import a version that technically is from a better element, but has significant transfer issues along the bottom of the frame, or you can go with the sort of warts and all print scan on the Image Blu-ray. Both masters are the full 115-minute version, both have the English audio, but the foreign editions will have more audio options, and some of them do have a couple basic extras as well. There is also now a Studio Canal version that came out in 2024 in France, and some other modern Blu-ray releases in Europe that apparently are stemming from that. I don't know if the film has actually been given a new scan and master, or if the Studio Canal version is merely once again reusing the Italian source, or maybe remastering that. There's not really any information about those, so at present, if you're in the US and you just want a solid version of the film, the Image Blu-ray, even though it's bare bones and a direct print transfer, it's still probably the best option, as it is relatively inexpensive, and there's probably not a reason to import the foreign releases unless you specifically want those supplements and the other audio tracks, or you want to see the better but compromised transfer. Again, I just don't know if the recent 2024 versions are anything new in the transfer department. My Name is Nobody is still a must-see film for all Sergio Leone fanatics. You really do have to have a copy in your collection if you're a Leone completist, because he did produce the film. It's based on an idea he had, and he did at least direct some portions of the second unit and a handful of pieces. Admittedly not adding up to a whole lot, and he didn't actually direct the film, but it does have his direct involvement, and it is a film that is openly poking fun at his classic films. So you do have to have a copy. It is important for Leone fans to look at, and some fans do enjoy it much more than I do. Plus, you get the combination of Henry Fonda and Terence Hill, so it's also essential for fans of the Trinity films. But it's still a film that doesn't have the greatest transfer history. The presentations are not super great. They're at least passable for what they are outside of transfer problems. And it's a film that definitely defines the term "your mileage may vary." I think depending on what you enjoy in Italian Westerns or what you like about Sergio Leone's films, that will determine how much you will enjoy My Name is Nobody. I do think the Blazing Saddles comparison is apt, though, because it is trying to do a lot of the same things that Blazing Saddles does, just in a different way and without the consistency of plot or energy driving that plot thread. And I think Blazing Saddles manages to do a lot of things that My Name is Nobody set out to do and just maybe didn't quite pull off. So those are my thoughts on the Image US Blu-ray of My Name is Nobody. I do hope at some point the film does get a proper transfer and at least maybe some nice supplements to get into the whole discussion of the degree of Sergio Leone's involvement in the actual shooting of the film, and maybe some greater context here and there. It'd be nice if maybe Sir Christopher Frayling might do a commentary for it someday. But until then, I think the Image Blu-ray is a solid way to see the film and probably your best option because it is relatively inexpensive and it's still available for around $15 or so, which is a far better prospect than what unfortunately you have to do with a lot of other Italian Westerns that are less famous and less discussed. And of course, Leone's films themselves, outside of the Arrow releases of the Dollars trilogy, all the other Leone films are still stuck in horrifying degrees of preservation problems and issues in their video masters and restorations. So at least with this film, you can see a solid enough version, even if it's a sort of warts and all HD scan, that is the complete film and has the original mono track, and it's bare bones, it is what it is, but at least it's there, solid enough and affordable. So as always, I hope my babblings about the world of Sergio Leone's films, Italian Westerns, and their physical media releases has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Again, I do think the Image Blu-ray is solid, and it's really the best option you have here in the US at present. As always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels by buying films on disc in order to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.